We have a very interesting weather pattern overtaking the United States as major snowstorms are targeting parts of Europe as we go through this week into early next week. So many are probably asking who will see snowfall. I'll have the answer to your question in this video, so let's begin. Let's start in Europe. Temperatures look to actually be above average for much of northern and central Europe, which may sound confusing if it's snowing across some of these areas. But remember that above average doesn't necessarily mean warm. It just means higher than normal temperatures, so it may still be cold enough to snow in some areas. The precipitation pattern is pretty straightforward, wet in the north, dry in the south. We've seen that as a result of a persistent high pressure area. Next up, the day-to-day pattern. We already have one of the winter storms moving in right now. It's going to bring some heavy snow, especially to parts of northern Norway, northern Sweden, and Finland. But then the first widespread major winter storm looks to come into the picture over Greenland on the 19th before reaching Iceland by the 20th. It will then start impacting Scandinavia on the 21st with widespread heavy snow and strong wind before moving inland on the 22nd. We're probably going to see a mostly rain event across Central Europe with this first system since we don't have enough cold air in place. The rain will be accompanied by very strong winds as well, so we may have to deal with some power outages. The low pressure area from this system will be weakening and it will be over the Baltic countries by the 23rd, with widespread snowfall across Eastern Europe, especially over the mountains. Then we see the third winter storm located over Scotland and the North Sea by the afternoon of the 23rd, before moving into Norway once again with very heavy snow and rainfall heading into the 24th. This is the system which may bring a much more substantial blast of cold air, so places like Central Europe as far west as the Benelux will have to watch the way this storm develops to determine how cold it will get. I'll be closely monitoring the trends with this system, especially since there's a lot of uncertainty left. We'll take a closer look at these specific storms on my next forecast since they're definitely looking very intriguing. But for now, I'm going to show you my personal snowfall forecast for December 18th through the 25th. Anywhere in the blue is where I think snowfall is possible, and I've come to this conclusion after reviewing multiple weather models. Places in southern Europe will probably see snowfall mainly in the mountains, while the Nordic and Baltic countries will see widespread snow. But in case you're wondering about that white area, this is actually a zone that I've highlighted due to increased uncertainty. Thinking back to the model runs we just looked through, this is an area which will be right on the boundary of cold and warm air, so it's going to be pretty sensitive. This is why the weather models have had such a hard time figuring out if these areas will see snow. And with that said, it's too early to make a bold prediction for this region, so if you're hoping for snowfall in the UK, Ireland, and Benelux, make sure you stay tuned for my next update. And this brings us into chapter 2 of this video. For the US, we have a very different pattern compared to last year. Temperatures are generally well above normal across much of the lower 48, and especially in the northern plains, Great Lakes, and upper Midwest, which is actually quite typical for an El Niño. This region of the country is where we usually would see snowfall, so having temperatures so much warmer than normal will definitely affect that. For precipitation, far northern areas are expected to be drier, especially around the northwest, which yet again is typical for an El Niño, while southern and central areas are going to be wetter, especially from Nebraska down into Texas. For the weather model walkthrough for the coming days, we're going to start off today on Monday, December 18th. Even though that temperature map showed widespread warmer than normal temperatures, we do have a coastal storm exiting the country with a big blast of cold air expected to move in behind it. This will bring a chance of cold temperatures and snowfall across the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley, and then into the interior Northeast through Tuesday night. Then on the west coast, you'll notice constant rainfall moving in, associated with a cut-off low pressure area. This will continue after the east coast storm is gone, so other than the rainfall across the west, the lower 48 will be quite calm until about the 21st. This is when we see some moisture get flung into the central plains, and this is only the beginning of a very active stretch of weather for this portion of the country. On the 22nd, the cutoff low will move into the southwest as storms and rainfall continue for the plains, and on the 23rd and 24th, we may see a new system move quickly into the west before producing a new system right behind the one which is already ongoing, and then this will continue into the 25th and 26th, which would be early next week. What I do want you you to notice about this model run was not as much about the exact systems, but how far north the moisture can get without switching to snowfall. Watch as we really don't see any snow break out as the storms reach the Dakotas and Minnesota, something quite rare to see over this part of the country by the end of December. Now that brings us to the snowfall part of this discussion. This is roughly what the current snow depth is across much of the United States on December 18th, and as you can see, it's actually quite low. There's usually much more snow on the ground around the lower 48 by this point in time, and there really isn't much besides the mountainous west and far northern areas like North Dakota, Minnesota, and Wisconsin. And then we compare that to the snow depth by December 25th, and it really just doesn't get much better. If we do get a new storm to move into the western United States, we may see a new layer of snowfall over the mountains, but anywhere east of the Rockies doesn't look to get much improvement. But that doesn't mean we won't see any snowfall between the 18th and the 25th, because like I mentioned earlier, we have a quick blast of cold air moving in behind that east coast storm. Now moving on to my personal snowfall forecast, this shows us where I expect to see snow either on the ground or falling between December 18th and the 25th. For the western United States, I expect snow to be both on the ground and falling between this time frame, and that will be confined mainly to higher elevations. If you do live in the western United States but in a lower elevation such as a valley, make sure you seek more detailed information from your local National Weather Service office. For the northern plains into the east, snow is going to be possible at some point in that time frame that I mentioned, with existing snowpack already over North Dakota and northern Minnesota. For everyone else not included in the blue, snowfall is unlikely, but if you are closer to the blue shade, then the chances are still low, but perhaps not as low as other areas such as the south. I hope that helped you know who will potentially get snowfall this week. If you did like this weather forecast, make sure you are subscribed to the channel for more videos for both Europe and the US. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for further updates.